So, welcome everybody to Unscripted, where women's power talks. And I'm here today with Christine Gutierrez, who has been a therapist and coach. And now I know you're transitioning out of that work into something new. We could talk about that soon. And also an author who wrote this amazing book, I Am Diosa. And I was just on Amazon where it's blowing it up. You should go check it out and reading some of what people have to say, and it's pretty extraordinary. So I typically, Christine, start these conversations by having people introduce themselves and their work, but actually, after having read a little bit about what your work is and people's resonance with what you're doing, I thought it might be more powerful if we did something a little bit different today. And I'm going to invite you to think about what question or what topic or what thing do you feel it is most important to talk about at this time. And I'm going to invite you to kick off our conversation and basically direct it because it's going to flow. We're going to have our own thing happen, but I'm going to invite you to lead it off with that thing that you feel is most important to say at this time.
Yeah, I guess for me, uh, the thing that's most important, I mean, right now we're living in such crazy times,
Yeah.
COVID, and we have so much less human interaction, and we're doing so many things on Zoom, and we are living in a world. Anyway, we were already moving in that direction because of so much social media and technology. If you hear a squeak in the back, that's my little baby Bodhi.
Okay.
um,
Welcome.
and and for me, I think that that is a reminder for us that we need to connect in whatever ways we can. And mental health and emotional health obviously is intricately connected with socializing and community. And not having that, I think right now we need to talk about it and normalize how we're feeling about the mourning that we're doing as a society and as a people, uh, from what life used to be like, from what life is like now, because we're still in it. Most of us around the world are in still some type of quarantine or mask life, or living with different kind of restrictions. There's definitely less freedom
Mhm.
in a lot of ways, and we don't know what's going to happen fully yet. We don't know when it's going to stop. We don't know what the solution is, and so all of that, I think, is a really big deal when it comes to mental health, when it comes to taking care of our psyche and our spirit. Because at least for me, I feel like these are heavier, darker times, but also times that require us to kind of use our spiritual tools more than ever. And so my book, of course, as a Scorpio, deep little soul that I am, came out during 2020, right? And came out during these times. And I feel like that was not an accident, because we need to do our deep inner work more than ever, because we're going to get triggered more, because we're living in these times where the external world is so unstable, and it's the veils are falling, and we're seeing so many injustices that were always there, but that are more in our face now. And so for me, I feel like this is a time for us to get spiritually connected more than ever, and to get plugged into a community of people who are like-hearted, that can support each other, even if it is online, because we're going to need to be armored up for this spiritual warfare. It's like this is like a spiritual war, and in order to fulfill our spiritual duty, we need to have a team. We need to have a practice that grounds us, that allows us to nourish ourselves, and allows us to just really remember that we are not alone, that we're being guided. And so for me, that's a spiritual practice, but that's also practical things that we can do.
So you say you use this term spiritual duty. What do you mean
Mhm.
by that?
Sometimes when I talk, it just like I just channel, or I just like,
Yeah, yeah,
I
I
don't even
hear
know
you.
the words that are coming out. But for me, I think what that means is like being able to I always see my spirituality as, an honor. It's a privilege. It's a responsibility. And not only for me, but for others, for showing up in the world as well, as, an activist or being a voice for those that are marginalized or, but it is a duty to take care of our spiritual health and our connection to source or spirit or whatever you want to call it, God, higher self. Because when we do that, we are better off, we are healthier. And if someone is not into that kind of language and they just want to use a more, psychological language, which is totally okay too, being able to take care of yourself by getting support in your mental health right now is a duty for yourself to be able to make sure that you're okay during these tough transitions, but also for the world. Because if you do consider yourself a kind person or a spiritual person, then that means you are both of the world and not of the world. And that means that you have to do your part. And right now, we're also seeing, in addition to COVID, we saw so many things happening with Black Lives Matter, with racial injustice, with, and again, this is not new. It's not like
Right.
now Black people are,
Yeah.
being treated poorly. No, Black people have been treated poorly. They were,
That's right.
for centuries, and indigenous people of color and many different other cultures as well. But particularly during this time, focusing on Black lives because of all of the racial injustices that were coming out. And this is just, for me, spiritually, it's just different seasons that arise. And in this specific season of life, we had this happen. And so for me, that was like a alert for everyone that says that they're on their spiritual path to like really dive in, because the world needs us to be stronger. And what was before, I feel like we were using our spiritual tools and we didn't realize why we were using them in a lot of ways. Maybe we thought it was just, oh yeah, I want to get better. I want to heal from my childhood trauma. But there's an extra layer to it now. There's an extra layer to why we are doing this work. And there's an extra need for it because of that collective pain that we're also dealing with. And so, yeah, it is a duty. And it's a gift to be able to give ourselves that during this time and to give the world that, because we're stronger in many ways when we do that. And when we ask for support, of course, as well.
So I almost hear spiritual duty as bi-directional. It's a duty for self-care, and it's a duty to extend that care externally.
Absolutely.
And I think that this is a really important point, because a lot of times we can think about our spirituality as an alignment with our spiritual truth, but and nurturing that connection, but then the piece where it moves forward and out also is really critical. And how do I project that alignment I feel internally into creating more of an alignment externally? You know what I'm saying? So what's your sense about that piece of it?
I mean, I think that, a lot of spirituality, I think spirituality at its core has always been about some sort of, inner alignment and externally giving that back to the world, right? Making the world a better place, being the light, whatever religious background that you come from. I was raised Catholic. I consider myself more spiritual than anything, but, being like Christ, being like Christos, Christ like, and Christ also representing the crystal, light. And so for me, that has always been interwoven throughout, all religions around the world. But we've forgotten that because it's also become an industry in many ways. And religions have also strayed away from the heart and from the core of these messages, and have had a lot of hatred and a lot of pain, and have actually caused a lot more injustice than love. And the same in the wellness industry. And, something that's supposed to be so beautiful has been so harmful. I've been in this particular kind of world of spirituality and wellness and personal development for about like 11 years. And, just a student, always learning, always observing, always part of, always, kind of, and, also I'm still in the process of untangling some of the pain and kind of world that I expose myself to in some ways, because there was a disconnect between that inner and outer. It was very self-focused and very selfish. And I remember intuitively knowing that something was off, something's not right here. It was a space that felt very elitist in many ways, and excluded people, and was very white dominated, and also that lacked warmth, that lacked love, that groundedness that I associated with that inner peace and love, and also true peace and love on the outside, which means that you do speak up on issues when there's injustice, that it's not like this fake spiritual bypassing. And so for me, that spiritual world, I say that this is like the age of like where the real ones have to step up, where real spirituality has to arise, where real, honor and respect of what it means to actually be a spiritual or a being or light worker. People had this, term, oh, I'm a light worker. And it's like, well, I don't think you know what that means if you aren't using your voice to help others, right? Like you cannot just focus on yourself if you are a true healer. And I think because it became very popular and it became like kind of like cool, some of that that space of reverence that comes from learning and understanding what this is really about was lost. And for me, this is a process of like reminding myself and reminding others that now more than ever, we need true spiritual beings that are in alignment, doing their inner work, diving into the core of whatever they need to do, because the more we heal, the better we can show up in our lives for ourselves and others, but simultaneously showing up for the world and saying, how can I say that, we're talking about love and unity if there isn't unity in the world, right? How can we stand and say, I stand for oneness, if you're not actually standing for oneness and looking at all the ways in which we're not one? And so that's kind of my perspective on what's happening right now, and what I hope to happen and to continue to happen in this world that we're living in.
What I think you talk about the wellness industry as sort of an industry, or the spiritual light worker industry as an industry. And whenever you have a label and a category, it can draw people, but that very thing can then often obscure the truth. And the
Yes.
truth is often much more simple and uncategorized, and this direct experience, right?
Absolutely.
And I think about the early church, and I'm just going off a little bit here, and about how the church emerged, and then there were the Gnostics who really were like, it's my relationship to God or whatever, and I have access. It doesn't need to be mediated by an institution or organization, and I think what happens is when the true path, or the ability to connect and really truly understand what's happening there, gets usurped by an organization and institution, then people hand over their power, right? And this has happened for centuries, men, women, all of us. And then you forget
Yes.
what it is to be personally connected, like the school that I developed also in 2020. So it's very interesting that all these things are emerging in the midst of this pandemic crisis and disruption. It's all about one's personal power, and how do you get something that other people can't define for you, but also can't take it away from you, right?
Yeah.
And it's
Absolutely.
the same thing with spirituality. And so, labels, whatever, they can be obscuring rather than supportive of what is true and what is really genuinely needed at this time.
Yeah. And because we are in the world, we need these, kind of forms and things, and we use them, but oftentimes they're corrupt in some ways. And so my focus is saying, there is a calling that's happening right now for those people to return to the root, as I've been saying, to return to the core of true healing, of your true spiritual work. And that means holding space for both, the darkness and the light, not just, over glorifying being happy all the time, or talking about being, a light worker all the time. I joke that I am a shadow worker as well. And I think that now there is all of these illusions are crashing. And so what was holding together this facade of, oh no, we're not a racist country, or, oh no, we're, yeah, wellness is great. We're promoting, healthy juices and all these things. All those things are crashing because eventually the truth is always revealed. And so I see that as a good thing, but it's painful at first because there's a mourning, there's a shedding, there's a death, there's a betrayal of, something you believed in or a world that you felt safe in. And that's no longer safe in the ways But I believe that on the other side of that, so to give people hope, so it's not all doom and gloom, is that on the other side of that is a true, authentic experience of something, a wellness industry that I pray is more inclusive and not just, to tokenize people of color, but to actually value their voices, their medicine, their work.
Yeah.
And I think that, at first, some people will be resistant and those people will eventually not make it in this kind of world, hopefully anymore, because I believe in this kind of new world that we're creating with all of this chaos that's emerging. I do believe that there's some sort of new spiritual world that's emerging. And that's why you're called to create that program. That's why you're called to,
Yep.
speak on these things. And I'm pumped that that's happening because I hated the way it was before. I thought it was awful and so fake. And to me, this is more real. And eventually there will be an integration again where it won't be as painful. I think that there will be an integration, and hopefully, after elections and things will integrate a little bit more, but we're still going to have to be stronger than we're used to. And that means we're going to have to be more rooted and take more time for self-care and take more time to be in nature wherever we can find it, even if that means you're taking a shower and you're imagining yourself being a waterfall because you don't have access to that. Just finding ways to ground as much as possible throughout this.
Yeah. So tell me about, because it sounds to me like the retreat space that you're planning to put together is in this new vein, right? That your hope is to be a holding place for the emergence of some of this. Is that right? So can you talk
Yeah.
about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I have been doing retreats now for about 10 years. And this past year would have been this one specific retreat that I do every year called the Diosa retreat, which is kind of like my spiritual surgery. I joke that it's a very intense retreat, but beautiful. And we postponed it to next year. And I probably will be having another teacher that has studied with me and that has been to my retreats teach it, because probably I will have a baby by then, God willing. So we had to postpone it to next year. And the goal was, over this whole kind of journey of doing my retreats, was eventually I would have a mountain space where I could have my own retreats. And because it's a lot of money as an entrepreneur to rent out this whole hotel and this whole venue, which is what I've been doing, which is beautiful. It's amazing, but it's costly. And I knew I wanted to invest into my own space, and that it might not be perfect at first, but it would be something that we put a lot of intention and plant seeds and that grows with time. So my husband and I got a house right as the pandemic happened. Like, we didn't know. We were on our honeymoon. We were in Guatemala having the time of our lives in Lake Atitlan. And then we came back and we heard about COVID, and really the world shut down a couple of days later. So we signed for our papers for the house the day before the world shut down, the day before all government offices closed down. And this particular house is in Sidra in Puerto Rico. It's in the mountains of Puerto Rico. And that's where my bloodline is from. That's where my husband's bloodline is from. Born and raised in Brooklyn. So I say I'm New Yorican. He's Boricua, full
Right,
Boricua.
that's right, New Yorican.
Yeah, I still have my New York in me. And it was his family's house, the family's country house they would go to on the weekends. And we got a great deal. We got it. It has 5 acres, really beautiful, away from people, but not so far away, an hour away from San Juan, not that far, easy drive. And so we were like, let's work with this. And so we started to, we've already started, renovating it, and little by little kind of mapping out the design of the land that we want, and the little, cabins and things that we want to put. And the goal is to have people come, right? To create a space where people can come and gather, and especially a lot of local people, because right now with COVID, we're not going to be promoting kind of like external travel to the island unless it's needed. But for now, as we, we're still in the building or the renovating phase, but to hold community gatherings, to have this amazing chef that we know, Chef Jerome, who cooks these amazing vegan cuisine, or different chefs in the island that come and cook, and we can gather and talk and share and talk about our dreams and talk about our plans and share resources and gather together as a community, where people can come and plant and garden and have food that, you get to eat from the earth. And that, we have a lot of land. So being able to give, a certain space of the land where we can work with a project that they come and work, you take your food, you sell it. We're not going to need all that food for just 2 people. And we're not interested in selling our crops. And so having all of these kind of ideas and our mini retreats and hosting experiences where people can heal, where they can gather, where they can, connect with other like-hearted people. And and it'll be a space where, transformations will happen, and where laughter will happen just as much as tears will be shed, and healings will occur.
So what is different about this vision than what you have seen out there? Like, what is this new path? Try to crystallize it a bit.
I don't know if it's different than, I think that there's 1,000 different people, tens of thousands of people around the world that are hearing this call to do things like that. And people are already doing that. And I think, the more the merrier, because we need a lot of people doing this. So I don't think that it's so unique in the sense that, there's this exists.
No, different from the old paradigm.
Yeah.
From the old paradigm.
I mean, for me, I was already in another paradigm, even when the old paradigm was here. So I was already aware that this was the future, and that we were going to be called back to the roots, and that we needed to, get, start getting solar lights and do all these things. Like, there was something about sustainability, about, changing our relationship. Because I grew up in Bushwick in Brooklyn, in a small apartment, like, city girl. So, but there was a knowing that eventually something of that wasn't going to work fully, and now we know, with all the things going on in the environment and all these changes, that something has to change, right? Even if it's small shifts. And so it reflects the future that we want to have, right? It reflects that future of being more mindful, of having and holding. And again, we've had that before. We've had that. I talked to my aunts, and when they were hanging out with hippies, and there's been many different kinds of revolutions of this kind. This is not
that's
new,
right. It's cyclical.
It's cyclical. It is. And so this is just another incarnation of what people before us have done, and they've paved the way for us to be able to do this again, right? So I'm aware that this is just time for it to happen again, with the specific things that we're called to do in this time.
That's
because
right.
now we have different kind of issues with, in the world.
That's right. The needs of the time. So you do it again, you bring the old wisdoms forward, but in a new expression, because what you're called to address is different.
That's right.
That's right. Yeah. And that is actually real medicine that is capable of adjusting to what's being asked, right? It's not the same thing, speaks to the same issues, it's alive, right?
It is. It's alive, and it's breathing, and it's shifting with the times. And it's, I love thinking about how, because I've always felt that everything's the same, but different, right? Like, it's the cycles, and it's the same, but it's different. Yeah. And we're just, just so happen to be born in this space and time, and living in this space and time in this moment. And so that's what I'm going to focus on, right? What's in front of me. But, when you think about it, there's all these massive rights and all these things that have happened in every single decade you can think of, you know, Black people get the right to vote, women get the right to vote, gay people in certain states only can now get married, right? But all these changes that happen, this is because people speak up for marginalized communities, and they, you know, protest, and they do all the things that they need to do, and laws get changed, right? So that's why
right.
politics do matter, because laws change and things change as well. Even if we are so, you know, painfully disheartened with the world, and we're like, oh no, it doesn't matter, but it does matter, and things do change. And so now that that has happened, yes, there's suffering in those spaces still. So how has that pain carried on, and what does that look like now? Yes, it's gotten better, but that's not an excuse. So what does it look like now, and how do we show up now for
That's
the
right.
pain, not comparing it and saying, oh wow, we got so much better. No, being grateful for the changes, but not staying stagnant and saying this is where we're going to stay. No, we want to create a future that is based on so much love and respect, right? And even if it's idealistic in some ways, and we know that we won't see it in our lifetime, who cares?
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's still the purpose of being alive as a human. Like, it sucks that you're not going to get to see everything, but you might get to see some of those changes. And, you know, if we do our duty with, you know, nature, maybe we will have generations to come that get to live and experience the work that we've done. And so it's really quite amazing that that people have been doing this, and that it is cyclical, and that it does keep changing, and that we are called to show up in this specific time. And I think that it's important to remember that this isn't new, that people have done this before, and changes have been made, and we still have more to do. And
Yeah.
so, yeah.
You know, I was going to call out that you are not shy to talk about suffering and pain. And I think that this is one of the things that this time of COVID and economic disruption has given people permission to talk about the underbelly of life's experience. And so much, there is the sense that if you are achieving, or if you're leading a spiritual life, or things should look and be a certain way.
Yes.
Right. But the truth is that we all have the light and the dark. And it is as important to embrace that, the pain, the suffering. And I almost feel like there's a new permission that is seeping into the culture in terms of spirituality, not just being love and light, but about being, I mean, I can't tell you how many people I've spoken to already in these unscripted talks that really are all about reaching into the pain, reaching into the darkness and through the darkness, and starting to reimagine what that can be like, because suffering pain is often a portal into something that's really different.
Yeah. And I'm sure you attracted also, and, you know, call in people like this because you yourself, within yourself, hold space for those realities, both of those realities. And I do feel like there is a shift happening. I do feel like people are starting to have that. And also there's less permission for people to do that, because we are seeing that companies are falling when they're not abiding by that, because people are speaking up. So even if there's people that don't authentically feel the way we do, they're kind of being forced to, right? And it's not my favorite way for people to change. I'm not a fan of, I don't like, unless someone's, you know, massive company calling them out or something like that. I'm not a fan of, like, you know, the just the way call out culture is currently happening. I do think that there needs to be more in-depth conversations. However, speaking up about things and making things, you know, speaking your values and your truth and being unapologetic about that is changing the culture of business, and making them say, okay, well, you know, maybe I didn't previously care, but my customers care, because money talks for them, right? So there's power in that, and changing, you know, oh, well, this company is not being in alignment with, you know, those two realities. They're not speaking up on issues. We already know that's why companies have like corporate social responsibility and all these kinds of parts of their business.
That's right.
They know that consumers do care about that, and their rankings go up, and they make more money when they care about things. And so Some of it is not authentic, which I don't love, but it's a start in making people make changes. And then there's a lot of people that are authentically having wake up calls and saying, wait a minute, this is something's been off about this. And whoa, I'm waking up and I don't want to be part of this, because we've also been, we're in the matrix too. We've also been brainwashed in our own ways. We're also untangling our own colonized mentality and painful
Totally.
downloads of everything. So we're in it. Like, I know
Yep.
I'm doing my work too. And I live in Puerto Rico, which is a colony, which is a whole nother story. But
Totally.
so we have a lot that we're doing. And I'm a sensitive person. I know that it's a lot, and I have a lot of compassion for all of us, including myself, are sensitive beings that are just like, our hearts break. Like, it's so sad. Like, you look at the world and you're like, oh my God, there's so much pain, there's so much suffering. And it's, social media makes it so much more in your face than before, because you didn't have access to technology in those ways where you were constantly having so much input,
Yeah,
and
that's
so limiting that time and being, careful again in that self-care and saying, you're not gonna get more information by, scrolling more time. No, get the information you need and then shut down, right? Don't feel pressured to, constantly stay hooked into that, because that's not how true change happens. And again, like, even with Black Lives Matter, I remember when the first, like, the black square thing came out, intuitively, I didn't post it because I was like, no, I'm not going to post something to be silent. I'm going to just share what's going on, and I'm going to share other people's stories. That felt more aligned for me.
Yeah.
Even though I know it was, beautiful intention and people had good intentions about it, for me, it was more like, no, let's just talk about this. And also, this is not something that I don't need to be performative about anything. I don't need to post something now because people are watching on. So no, like, I've always cared and I will always care, but I don't always have to do everything online. I have my own, world. I'm involved in a lot of, I give back money, and I'm not going to post everything I do online. And so I also speak about that to people, where it's like, don't get hooked in, especially with the newer generations. Like, don't get hooked in to having to perform. Do your real soul work do your real soul work and show up for the world in the way that feels aligned for your spirit, because you're going to show up in such bigger ways than doing something just because you're following the crowd. Do it because your heart moves you. Do it because your spirit moves you. Take the time to research what you're talking about. Take the time to go out there and, really volunteer or donate if you can, or share something. But yeah, take the time to let it come from your heart so that it's real. And that's how real change sticks anyway, is when you do it for yourself, because you really want to. So I think we're in really, powerful times, even though they're intense, they're powerful.
It's funny because it's kept coming up for me to talk to you about kids, teenagers, young adults. And then you said something about young people, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. Because you have young people coming up, right? And they have tremendous exposure. So it's almost like they are getting hit with a tidal wave of data, right? About what's right, what's not right, what's cool, what's happening. And it's very easy to get in the flow, which is good because they're exposed to different things. There's a lot of education. So, in the younger ages, and, we're both therapists. So, for me, if I'm working with anybody who's under 25, it's always building up. I'm not tearing down, because just developmentally they're building up. And so putting in pieces, right? So you look at this younger generation, and they really are in that space where there's a lot of education that goes on. There's a lot of input that's really important to development before you can start, like, pulling all it apart, right? So you have these young people that they're getting these cultural, it's almost like drinking from a fire hose. They're getting just wiped with this stuff, and it's very easy to go with the flow, but that is not really authentic. It's data, it's education, it's information. It's another layer of outside in information. And so it's like this very interesting thing. It's like, how do we keep or support youth to be part of all these things, which is part of that age, you know, the drama of that age, which is
Yeah.
beautiful, right? But also, what's the language of, you are also this individual, and here are the tools that make sense for someone at your age and your experience to begin to be connected to your own truth, right? And there's some people, I mean, look at that, you know, some climate activists, some young
Yeah.
people are just
So
like crazy hooked in, right? But so there's this balance, especially with youth, about how do we keep both realities coming at them. So it's not all about, you know, performance. It's
yeah.
not all about just being part of, but it's really, hey, I'm also separate. And what's my truth here, right?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I'm not plugged in enough to the teen community to know enough, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
it really takes, you have to be a specific expert in that area, because and also be like, when I very briefly worked with, you know, as a family therapist, and worked with all ages and in a high school, and it was another ball game, and
That's right.
I couldn't do it. I was just like, guys, I can't, you know. I was like, it requires, you have to be called to do it. It has to be like your gift. And for sure it wasn't my gift. I definitely work better with adults, and working more with teens in terms of like coming in to give a talk or something like that, where it's more casual and fun. But they have a different world of pressures that even I didn't have. You know, I'm 35, and I look at their world and I'm like, I can't even relate at all. You know,
That's right.
I am just like, I feel so old. Like, it's funny because I always consider myself, you know, like this rebel and so different and unique and open-minded. And my husband and I laugh because we're like, for two open-minded, you know, hippie, flowy, fluid people, I feel like the oldest ever. When I hear the conversations or the things or the language and the things they get upset about, I'm like, not my generation.
Yeah.
But I trust that there's a medicine that they're bringing, again, because I believe in cycles. So I believe that they have a unique anger and a unique focus and a unique intention and a medicine that I can't understand, because it's not my job. It's not my job to fully understand it, in the sense that I am still bringing and focusing in on the medicine that I'm meant to bring in. And I do think that, you know, like, for example, I love everyone, you know, be whoever you need to be. I believe in, gender is fluid and sexuality is fluid, and being able to, you know, whatever pronoun you want to use for you, use it, because you need to use what makes you feel you.
Yeah, you be
right?
you. Yeah.
But I don't like the call out culture where it's like, if I put something and they're like, well, you have to change this and this, I don't like it because I'm 35, you know? So I'm like, no, boo, like, you choose what works for you, but you can't tell me what to put in my profile. I don't need to put anything in my profile, you know? So there's certain things where it's like, it goes beyond that generational gap. And I laugh because it's what happens with, my grandparents or other people in different generations, where you're learning from them. And I'm constantly being schooled and learning and downloading things from, because I want to be part of this conversation. I want to learn. I want to know what the medicine is that they're bringing. But I'm also clear that there's certain things that I'm not going to get, and that I want to stick to. Like, for example, we had someone that, was just like calling out this other artist in Puerto Rico, and was just like saying all these mean things. I'm like, the girl, just talk to her. Don't screenshot shit online. Go pick up the damn phone and you call her, you have a conversation. Old school,
Yeah.
So these are those things that are different. But guess what? I also know that them doing that has changed a culture in corporations, because they've been calling out, because they've been so gung-ho, because they've been so forward. So with everything comes balance. Eventually things smooth out. In the beginning of any change, there's always big commotion and very strict. It's like with any kind of change, when you're learning boundaries and you go overboard and you're too strict with your boundaries, or you're too fluid with your boundaries and you're letting people, it takes time to kind of get to the center and kind of like allow yourself to integrate these lessons. But I think it's beautiful that, again, that we're living in times where people care, because youth now more than ever believe and know that they have a voice, and they do. We've always had, but people have platforms now with social media that essentially makes them a news outlet.
That's right.
They have their own news outlet to share content. So yes, I am so in awe of, and also terrified by, because there's so much power in that. And like you said, there's still not as much discernment at that age. And so as parents, I really think that as parents, it really comes down to education and parenting to help your child have boundaries, even as a teen, and having open conversations and dialogues and reading things together and sharing wisdom intergenerationally so that you can learn from one another and also give feedback, because that's part of what it means to also guide our children or guide our youth, is that they don't have all the information in the world. They don't know how to take care of everything on their own, and they are oversaturated, and they need our support so that they know that that while they have so much wisdom, that we also have wisdom to share. And I think that, you know, having those conversations in school, talking about the dangers of social media, talking about the dangers of, like, you know, poor information, having parents that sit down and have these dialogues. You know, I know for sure that, you know, I will be having conversations with my kids about these things because they're necessary. And, you know, I want them to be able to know kind of the pros and cons of everything and to talk it out, and then they can arrive at their own conclusions, but at least to have that, that learning there.
Well, you know, one of the things that you said that I totally resonate with, and I think is really important, is you're like, okay, this is my medicine. That is not my medicine. And that actually is, I think, really important, because that's why, or that's like an invitation for all the voices. If you think that you have the voice that includes everybody, there's no room for anybody, right?
No, yeah.
So the thing is, this understanding that each of us brings something unique and important to the conversation, but we don't hold the whole, is so critical to then saying, okay, but what piece can you share? Can you edify me with your piece? Here's my piece. What's your piece? And then all of a sudden, everybody has value in that situation, because nobody thinks they hold. And that, I think, is one of the biggest issues right now too, is that people are stepping in and have held this space. Well, I'm the wellness industry and this is how it is, right? As opposed to what's happening now, where these are all the diverse voices. People are bringing all their own medicine to share at the table. And therefore it becomes really critical to hear what unique gifts everybody's bringing, right?
Oh yeah. And also understanding, like, this is like a little kind of thing that I've always thought that I think is a little unique, but that is, you may not like something and it may not be you, right? It may not, you may be like, why are they protesting that way? Or, you know, whatever judgment someone has over something, but you may not know, or though you may not be called to do that thing, and you don't have to. There is something about that person doing that thing that's needed for the macro of the world shifting. And so I'm aware of that. And so I hold the both at the same time, where, you know, I mean, in this situation, I am protesting and sometimes, you know, what are you going to do if no one's listening to you? So you get mad, you get angry, you get upset. And hopefully, you know, we don't like any violence. We don't want to perpetuate any pain, but, you know, as you know, sometimes you have to shout, you have to get mad, and, you know, rage is part of that sacred activism as well. But what I'm saying is, if there were another person that is not okay with that, understanding that you don't have to be okay with something to know that in the overall grand scheme of things, for the shift of our humanity, we need those things. And same example with, you know, the kids that I think are sometimes too much with call out culture and don't engage in conversations, where I think that there needs to be more dialogue, especially when it's, you know, a friend or someone that you can have a conversation and tell them, hey, you know, I noticed that you wrote this. It might be better to write this, or having those dialogues. That even still, I recognize that there's something about that, though it needs to be tweaked maybe in my book, that there's something about that in the macro that is needed. And
Mhm.
that allows us to stay in our lane and to trust, like you said, that all of us have a piece that we're bringing to the puzzle. There's
Mhm.
angry activists, there's sweet and polished activists, there's
Mhm.
different kinds of everything, and we need
Mhm.
it all to
Mhm.
make
Mhm.
up this change. Your job is to mind your business and to do what is in your spirit to do, right? We have different roles in this journey on this
Yeah.
spiritual path. And, my only journey is to be who I'm called to be in this path, right? Like and to honor and respect to my best ability, as long as there's no injustice, right? Or hatred, others, right? And so this is the spiritual work now. This is why we're doing this work. This is why we go to therapy. This is why, to do both things, to have our lives be better, to heal the wounds that are within us, our emotional wounds, to love up the parts of us that were perhaps not nurtured in the ways that we wish there were by our parents, or that we needed more of in some way, or to integrate the parts of us that need integrating, but also to help make the world better. And and it's exciting for me to see so many of those more integrated kind of teachers showing up, and more diverse voices, Black, Indigenous, POC voices, marginalized, trans um, voices getting opportunities
Mm.
to be heard, seen, and valued, because representation matters.
Yeah.
And so even with my book, you started off with mentioning my book, the fact that I got to write a book um, and include a Spanish word in the title of an English, book by, one of the top publishing houses in the world, Penguin Random House, with Tarcher Perigi is the subgroup that I got signed with, is a sign to me that, things are changing, and that
Mm.
I was paid well, and it's something that I speak about often, because right now we still work with money as a currency to do things in life. So people need to value your work also financially.
That's
And,
right.
especially for anybody that's a person of color or a marginalized group, to really know that you're worthy of that, especially if you put in the work. I'm not talking about in the beginning and you're asking for a lot of money. I'm talking
Yeah.
about you
Yeah.
do the work and you put in the work
Yeah.
for years,
Yeah.
and then, knowing that your work has value. And so all of that is changing, and that's why I was so excited, not only just to write the book and put things in the book that I've done in retreats that have helped people, but also to be a role model, to say, if I could do it, you could do it. And to not just say it, but to create spaces where I tell people how to do it, and I
Yeah.
share, how to do that. And we create, low cost kind of programs where we're teaching
Yeah.
other people,
Yep.
okay, this is how you do it. Here's the behind the scenes, so that we can elevate together. And this is our time. This is our time.